The explosion shattered the morning silence like a fist through glass. Principal Katherine Reynolds dove behind her desk as memories flooded back. Memories of a battlefield half a world away, of commands barked through radio static, of the weight of responsibility that came with leading elite soldiers into combat. But that was another life. Now, in the quiet halls of Lincoln Heights Elementary, the only explosions were science fair volcanoes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Katherine's hands moved with practiced precision, checking her surroundings, a habit from her military days that had never quite left her. The noise had come from the maintenance room, just the ancient boiler acting up again, not insurgents or IEDs. She straightened her blouse, smoothed her sensible skirt, and drew a deep breath. The school board meeting was in 30 minutes, and budgets wouldn't balance themselves. The halls of Lincoln Heights Elementary erupted into controlled chaos as children emerged from classrooms like soldiers responding to battle stations. "Ms. Reynolds," called out Mr. Peterson, his voice cutting through the noise. "The district superintendent is here early. Think you can handle it?" The question stung just as it was meant to. Katherine had been principal at Lincoln Heights for 3 months now, after leaving a 20-year military career that none of her colleagues knew about. To them, she was just another administrator with a master's in education. Never mind that she'd graduated top of her class from West Point. Never mind that she'd led one of the most decorated Special Forces units through 3 combat tours. Never mind that she'd been one of the first women to command Green Berets in the field. "Copy that," she replied, forcing her voice to remain steady, then caught herself. "I mean, yes, of course. I'm ready." Old habits died hard. The superintendent roared into the school's main office, his presence filling the room. Katherine positioned herself at the receiving area, her trained eyes already assessing his body language. Budget cuts were coming. She could read it in his stance, in the tight set of his shoulders. "We need to talk about the funding proposal," he began without preamble. "The numbers don't add up." Katherine felt her stomach clench, but her hands remained steady. "My office, please," she directed, leading him toward the privacy of her small administrative space. The situation was precarious. Lincoln Heights served a predominantly low-income community, and every dollar was fought for with the determination of a battlefield conquest. As they walked, the superintendent continued his assessment. "Your proposal requests additional funding for after-school programs, enhanced security measures, and a completely revamped cafeteria service. The board is skeptical, to say the least." Katherine's training kicked in. In leadership, you saved what you could save. Resources went to the viable operations first. "The after-school programs are essential," she said quietly. "Many of our students have nowhere safe to go between 3 and 6 p.m. That's when juvenile crime peaks in this neighborhood." It was the hardest part of the job, the part that haunted her dreams. Every decision carried the weight of a child's future. Each choice meant someone thrived or faltered based on her judgment. "Ms. Reynolds," the superintendent appeared at her elbow. "The security measures you're requesting, bulletproof glass, updated lockdown systems, they're excessive for an elementary school." The criticism should have felt familiar. Instead, it just reminded her of how surprised everyone seemed when she prioritized safety. "Just doing my job," she replied evenly. "Well, keep it up. We've got reports of increasing gang activity in the neighborhood surrounding the school. Multiple incidents under investigation." The superintendent's expression was troubled as he looked out the window toward the community beyond the playground. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What is it?" Katherine asked, noticing his concern. "Intelligence says it's not just random violence. Someone's targeting specific locations. Schools, community centers, youth shelters. They're trying to break the community's will to resist gang recruitment." A chill ran down Katherine's spine that had nothing to do with the school's inadequate eating system. She'd heard stories from other principals, tales of drug dealers who specialized in recruiting children as young as 10. It was a violation of everything she believed in. But that didn't stop some predators from viewing schools as high-value recruiting grounds. "Are we safe?" she started to ask. "As safe as anyone can be in a changing neighborhood." But maybe keep your guard up, Reynolds, just in case. The intercom crackled to life. Ms. Reynolds, this is security. We've got eyes on suspicious activity at the corner store across from the playground. No response from the owner who usually waves at us. Katherine felt her blood turn to ice. The corner store was only 50 yards from where her students played at recess. She'd been there last week, buying popsicles for a class that had achieved perfect attendance. She remembered the children's faces, bright, curious, full of life despite the challenges that raged around them. The owner, Mr. Diaz, had been generous, throwing in extra treats and asking about how the children were doing in school. "Security. This is Reynolds," she replied. "Can you confirm the nature of the activity?" That's a negative. Too many people in the way for visual confirmation, but static filled the channel for a moment. "We're picking up chatter. Sounds like the same group from last month's incident." Katherine's hands tightened into fists. Last month's incident was administrative speak for the attempted recruitment of 2 fifth graders by local gang members. The superintendent noticed her expression. "You okay, Reynolds?" "I know those kids. There are families there, children. We have to do something." "We have to do our jobs," he replied firmly. "Which means staying here and educating the children who come to us. We're educators, not law enforcement." Katherine nodded, but her mind was already racing. The local police had shared concerns with her during their last community meeting. Tales of a gang leader who'd been terrorizing the neighborhood. They called him the Shadow for his ability to disappear after orchestrating violent incidents. According to the stories, he had a particular interest in recruiting from elementary schools, catching children before rival gangs could claim them. Another crackle from the intercom, this one louder. "All school personnel, this is Officer Mendez from District Security. We've received intelligence indicating possible gang activity in the area. All outdoor activities are to be canceled until further notice. Students should remain inside, and staff should avoid unnecessary exposure." Katherine looked around the school. The bright hallways that had seemed so welcoming this morning now felt vulnerable. The playground that had rung with children's laughter now seemed like an exposed target in a shooting gallery. But they had a job to do. The radio crackled again. "Ms. Reynolds, this is Ms. Garcia. Parents are arriving early for pickup, expressing concerns about neighborhood safety. ETA 15 minutes. The superintendent sighed. "Reynolds, I need you to coordinate with security. Looks like we're going to have an early dismissal situation." Katherine headed toward the security office, her mind still churning with thoughts of the corner store and the gang that might be watching them even now. She joined the education system to give children a safe place to learn, to make a difference in a world gone mad with violence. She hadn't signed up to face the same enemies she'd fought overseas, predators who targeted the vulnerable. But as she checked the school's lockdown procedures and prepared the staff for an orderly dismissal, Katherine found herself thinking about something her commanding officer had told her years ago. He'd been a legendary Green Beret, deployed to conflict zones during the worst insurgencies. "In war," he'd said, "everyone's a target. The only difference is whether you choose to be a victim or a defender." At the time, she'd been a young officer, planning her first command. The words had seemed abstract, philosophical. Now, with the sound of police sirens echoing through the neighborhood, and the knowledge that predators were targeting children through a storefront window, they felt like a prophecy. Katherine finished her preparations and looked out toward the community. Somewhere out there in the streets and shadows, a predator was hunting. He'd already struck at the corner store, and if the intelligence was correct, he wouldn't stop there. The thought should have terrified her. And part of it did. But another part, a part she hadn't accessed in the 3 months since becoming principal, felt something else entirely. A cold, calculating anger that reminded her she was more than just an administrator. She was a former commander of the United States Army Special Forces. She'd sworn an oath to protect the innocent and to serve her country. And if that gang leader thought he could terrorize her students and her community without consequence, he was about to learn just how wrong he could be. The sound of car engines filled the air as parents arrived for early pickup. Katherine took one last look at the neighborhood then headed out to coordinate the dismissal. She had work to do. Parents flooded the front entrance, their faces tense with worry. Katherine shielded her eyes against the afternoon sun as she directed the orderly evacuation, her administrator's clipboard bouncing against her hip. 30 nervous parents emerged from cars, each one carrying a story written in furrowed brows and anxious glances. "What's happening?" called out Mrs. Jimenez as she signed out her twins. "Police are everywhere, and the corner store has crime scene tape." Katherine's blood chilled. Crime scene tape meant something worse than gang recruitment had occurred. She looked down at the Jimenez twins, their dark eyes wide with uncertainty. Despite the walkie-talkie at her belt and security personnel flanking the entrance, Katherine felt the weight of vulnerability press down upon her. "We're implementing early dismissal as a precaution," she explained calmly. "Please make sure all children remain with an adult until they're safely home." As the crowd of parents and children thinned, Officer Mendez approached. The security officer's face looked older than his years. "What happened at the corner store?" Katherine asked quietly. "Gang violence." Mendez pulled off his cap, revealing a face etched with concern. "They beat Mr. Diaz badly when he refused to let them use his store as a recruitment spot. Systematic intimidation. They're sending a message to the neighborhood." "Did you see any sign of the shadow?" Katherine asked. Mendez shook his head. "Professional work. By the time officers arrived, the perpetrators were gone, but—" He paused, looking troubled. "The locals say this isn't the first time. Same tactics, same precision. The Shadows operation is expanding." Katherine had heard that name before in security briefings, but hearing it from someone who'd seen the aftermath made it real in a way that reports never could. "Any idea where he's operating from?" "Could be anywhere in this neighborhood. Perfect territory for gang operations. Economically depressed, limited police presence, vulnerable population, lots of abandoned buildings for concealment." Mendez looked at her curiously. "Why the interest? Your education, right? Just trying to understand what we're dealing with." It was a partial truth. Katherine was trying to understand, but not just from an administrative perspective. Something about the systematic nature of the attacks, the targeting of children, the intimidation of community members who stood up to gang influence, triggered a response in her that went beyond her role as a principal. She'd grown up in a military family. Her father had been a Marine, her mother Army intelligence, and her grandfather had served in Vietnam. The Reynolds family had a long tradition of service, and Katherine had absorbed tactical knowledge almost by osmosis during family gatherings. She knew that defeating an organized threat required understanding their patterns, their preferred positions, and their escape routes. It required thinking like a hunter. "Reynolds." Superintendent Johnson's voice interrupted her thoughts. "I need you for the emergency staff meeting. We need to discuss tomorrow's security protocols." Katherine hurried inside, pushing her tactical thoughts aside. The last of the children were being picked up, their innocent faces still alert despite the tension surrounding them. "Most of the staff are afraid to come in tomorrow," Johnson said as Katherine joined the group gathered in the library. "Can't say I blame them." Katherine surveyed the room. 20 dedicated teachers, looking to her for leadership. She'd faced tougher situations with fewer resources. "We have options," she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded elite soldiers. "First, we can close the school temporarily until the situation stabilizes." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the staff. "Or," Katherine continued, "we can implement enhanced security protocols, coordinate with local police for increased presence, and demonstrate to this community that we will not be intimidated." The room fell silent. "I recommend the second option," Katherine said, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her. "Our students need consistency, especially now. They need to know that the adults they trust won't abandon them when things get difficult." Mrs. Garcia, the kindergarten teacher, raised her hand. "What about our safety? I have 2 children of my own to consider." It was a valid concern, one that Katherine had anticipated. "I understand your concerns," she replied. "Any staff member who feels uncomfortable should take personal leave without penalty. Those who choose to stay will operate under heightened security measures." She moved to the whiteboard and began outlining protocols. Buddy systems for all movements outside classrooms, regular security sweeps, direct communication lines with police, modified entry and exit procedures. As she wrote, Katherine felt a familiar sensation, the calm focus that came with operational planning. This wasn't so different from preparing a mission brief for her Special Forces team. The objective was clear: protect the children and maintain educational operations in a hostile environment. By the time she finished, the mood in the room had shifted. Fear remained, but alongside it stood something stronger: resolve. We serve this community, Katherine concluded. Sometimes that means facing challenges that exceed our job descriptions. I'll be here tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. to implement these measures. I hope to see many of you joining me. As the meeting dispersed, Superintendent Johnson approached. That was unexpected, he said quietly. Where did you learn to handle crisis management like that? Katherine offered a small smile. I've had some experience with difficult situations. Johnson studied her with newfound curiosity. Your personnel file mentions administrative roles at various government facilities before moving into education. What kind of facilities exactly? The kind that prepared me for days like this, Katherine replied, gathering her materials. If you'll excuse me, I need to contact the police department about tomorrow's security arrangements. That evening, as darkness settled over the neighborhoods surrounding Lincoln Heights Elementary, Katherine Reynolds sat at her kitchen table with a cup of cooling tea and an open laptop. On the screen, news reports detailed the assault at the corner store, carefully avoiding mentions of gang activity to prevent glorifying the perpetrators. Between sips of tea, Katherine methodically researched everything she could find about the gang activity in the neighborhood. Police reports, news archives, community bulletins. She compiled and cross-referenced information with the same attention to detail she'd once applied to intelligence briefings before combat operations. By midnight, she had a profile that would have impressed any police analyst. The Shadow, whose real name was Marcus Torres according to confidential sources, was methodical, territorial, and highly strategic. He preferred to establish dominance through targeted intimidation rather than random violence. He focused on recruiting children, using a combination of fear and false promises. His operations centered around schools, parks, and community gathering places. But he also had weaknesses. His organization was hierarchical, dependent on his leadership. His lieutenants were loyal, but inexperienced, mostly teenagers themselves. His operations required public demonstrations of power, which made them predictable. And his focus on recruiting children meant he couldn't resist targeting educational facilities, which made his movements somewhat predictable. The plan that formed in Katherine's mind was simple, dangerous, and probably beyond the scope of her role as principal. But it was also the only way she could see to protect her students and the community they represented. She was going to bait the Shadow into exposing himself to law enforcement. As darkness deepened outside her window, Katherine began gathering the equipment she would need. Her personal phone with a recording app installed, a small notebook for documentation, the business cards of police contacts she'd made during community outreach events, and one more thing: a piece of her past that would surprise anyone who knew her only as Principal Reynolds. From a locked cabinet in her bedroom, Katherine retrieved a slim case containing a digital camera with a powerful zoom lens equipment she'd used during surveillance operations in her military career. It wasn't standard gear for an elementary school principal, but it might prove invaluable in the days ahead. As she prepared her gear, Katherine thought about Mr. Diaz from the corner store. According to the news, he was in stable condition at the local hospital, but his store would remain closed indefinitely. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a predator was hunting children for his gang, and the usual systems were failing to stop him. The police would eventually catch him, but how many more children would be recruited? How many more community members intimidated before that happened? Katherine checked her camera one more time, ensuring the battery was charged and the memory card empty. Tomorrow, she was going to give the Shadow something unexpected: a school that fought back. The neighborhood settled into its nighttime routine around her. Street lights cast yellow pools on empty sidewalks. Security gates closed over storefronts, and families locked themselves behind doors reinforced with extra deadbolts. But Katherine Reynolds sat by her window looking out at the dark silhouette of the community and planned a different kind of defense. She was done being just a principal. Tomorrow she was going to war. Katherine woke before dawn, her internal clock attuned to the rhythm of military life that had never fully left her. The school was quiet as she pulled into the parking lot, the sky just beginning to lighten at the edges. She'd arrived 90 minutes before staff were due to assemble, giving herself time to implement the first phase of her plan. She dressed purposefully, professional but practical clothing that allowed freedom of movement. The small camera was tucked into her jacket pocket, and her phone was loaded with direct contacts to local police. Today would be different from any other day of her tenure as principal. The school's maintenance staff arrived first, 2 men who had served the district faithfully for decades. "Ms. Reynolds, you're here early," said Marcus, the head custodian. "Security assessment," she replied, keeping her voice casual. "After yesterday's events, I want to make sure we've covered all vulnerabilities." It wasn't entirely a lie. She did need to assess security weaknesses, though her plans extended far beyond simple administrative precautions. As they walked the perimeter together, Katherine asked casual questions about the neighborhood. Who owned which buildings, which corners typically saw the most activity, where people gathered after school hours. The custodians, both longtime residents, provided insights no police report could capture. That abandoned recreation center, Katherine pointed across the street to a boarded-up building. How long has it been empty? Going on 3 years now, Marcus replied. Budget cuts. Used to be where kids went after school before the gangs moved in. Now it's just another place for trouble. Katherine noted the location mentally. According to her research, abandoned buildings were prime real estate for gang operations. The recreation center was positioned with clear sightlines to both the school and the surrounding streets. Perfect for surveillance. Any unusual activity there recently? She asked, trying to sound merely curious. Marcus and his colleague exchanged glances. New kids hanging around, the younger custodian said finally. Not from the neighborhood. Too well-dressed, too clean. They watched the school during dismissal. The intelligence confirmed Katherine's suspicions. The Shadow was using the recreation center as an observation post, monitoring the school's routines before making his next move. By the time the first teachers arrived, Katherine had completed her assessment and finalized her strategy. She greeted each staff member personally, noting with pride that only 3 had chosen to stay home. The rest had arrived determined, if nervous. We'll be operating under modified security protocols today, she explained during the brief morning meeting. All exterior doors remain locked at all times. Playground activities are limited to the inner courtyard. Dismissal will be staggered, with students released directly to verified guardians only. The teachers nodded, their expressions solemn but resolved. Katherine felt a familiar surge of pride, the same she'd experienced watching her soldiers prepare for difficult missions. These educators might never have trained for combat, but they possessed the same core of dedication to protecting what mattered. One more thing, Katherine added. I'll be conducting visible security walks throughout the day. If the people watching our school are looking for signs of weakness, let's show them nothing but strength. The morning proceeded with deliberate normalcy. Classes met, children learned, teachers taught. The machinery of education turning despite the tension. But beneath the surface, Katherine was implementing the most dangerous part of her plan. Every hour, she conducted a highly visible perimeter check, establishing a predictable pattern of movement. She made sure to pause at specific points, particularly those visible from the abandoned recreation center. She wanted to be noticed. She wanted to be recognized as the authority figure, the person in charge. Because predators like the Shadow didn't just target random individuals, they targeted symbols of authority. Breaking the principle would send a powerful message to the entire school community. During her third perimeter check, Katherine spotted them. 3 young men loitering near the recreation center, trying too hard to look casual. They were older than her students, but younger than most gang members, probably recent recruits themselves. Their clothes were too new, their postures too practiced. They were watching her. Perfect. Katherine maintained her pace, giving no indication she'd noticed their attention. As she completed her circuit and returned inside, she caught a glimpse of a 4th figure, older, with the confident posture of someone accustomed to command, emerging briefly from the recreation center before disappearing back inside. The Shadow himself, coming to assess the situation personally. "You've got visitors," Officer Mendez commented when she returned to the building. The security officer had positioned himself near a window with clear sightlines to the recreation center. "I noticed," Katherine replied. "Question is, what are they planning?" "Testing response times, establishing patterns, looking for vulnerabilities," Mendez said automatically, then caught himself. "At least, that's what I'd guess based on police briefings." Katherine nodded. "How quickly can police respond if we need them?" 3 to 5 minutes under normal conditions. Longer if there's an incident elsewhere in the district. Too long if the shadow decided to make a move. Katherine would need to create circumstances that brought law enforcement to them before any confrontation occurred. The midday hours passed without incident, but Katherine could feel the tension building. The observers remained at their posts, occasionally changing positions but never fully disappearing. They were waiting for something. At 2:15 p.m., 45 minutes before dismissal, Katherine received a phone call that changed everything. "Ms. Reynolds," came the strained voice of Mr. Diaz, the corner store owner who'd been hospitalized after the gang attack. "I need to warn you. They're coming for your school today." Katherine's training kicked in immediately. "How do you know?" "The nurse who checked me this morning, her son is being forced to work for them. He overheard plans. They're going to create a distraction during dismissal, try to grab some of the older kids while everyone's confused." "Thank you," Katherine said quietly. "Get well soon, Mr. Diaz." She ended the call and immediately activated the school's silent security protocols. A specific sequence of announcements over the intercom alerted staff to implement emergency procedures without alarming students. Classes would continue normally, but teachers would prepare for possible lockdown. Katherine then made 2 more calls, one to the police department requesting immediate presence for dismissal, and one to Superintendent Johnson informing him of the situation. "We should cancel dismissal entirely," Johnson argued. "Keep the children inside until we can arrange secure transportation." "That would signal weakness," Katherine countered. "And they just try again tomorrow, or the next day. We need to end this now." There was a long pause on the line. "What exactly are you suggesting, Reynolds?" "A controlled confrontation," she replied. "On our terms, with law enforcement present. That's extremely risky. Less risky than allowing them to dictate the terms of engagement." Another pause. "Do what you need to do. I'll back your play." Katherine ended the call and moved to the final phase of her plan. She gathered the school's 5 male teachers, Officer Mendez, and the 2. Immediate crisis dissolved into the organized chaos of an interrupted school day. Superintendent Johnson arrived amid the police activity, his expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen an administrator do," he said, approaching Katherine. "Sometimes there's a fine line between the two," she replied. "The police are saying you knew exactly who he was, had documentation of his activities, predicted his tactics." Johnson studied her with renewed curiosity. "Reynolds, who exactly did we hire as our principal?" Katherine offered a small smile. "Someone who understands that education only happens when students feel safe. Today they are. Tomorrow we'll work on math and reading." As the excitement gradually subsided and the last police cars departed, Katherine found herself alone in her office, completing the incident reports that would become part of the official record. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the familiar calm that followed successful operations. A knock at her door interrupted her paperwork. "Come in," she called. Officer Mendez entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an expression of newfound respect. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Thank you." Katherine accepted gratefully. "Mind if I ask you something?" Mendez settled into the chair across from her desk. "Go ahead." "Where did you learn to handle yourself like that? The way you positioned everyone, controlled the situation, even the way you stood. That's not standard principal training." Katherine considered the question. 3 months ago, she would have deflected with a vague answer about administrative experience. But today had changed something fundamental in how she viewed her role at Lincoln Heights. "I served 20 years in the military," she said finally. "Special Forces. I commanded units in combat operations overseas." Mendez nodded slowly, as if pieces were falling into place. "And now you're running an elementary school in one of the toughest neighborhoods in the city. The mission is different. The purpose is the same: protecting those who need protection. The staff is talking, Mendez said. Some of them are calling you a hero. Others are wondering what other secrets their principal might be keeping. What do you think? Mendez considered his answer carefully. I think you did what needed to be done, but I also think this isn't over. The shadow has connections, even from jail. There will be others. Katherine understood his concern. The line between educator and protector was one that school administrators weren't supposed to cross. It violated something fundamental about the separation between education and security operations. But in communities under siege, sometimes educating children required first ensuring they weren't recruited into lives of violence. Sometimes the most important lesson was showing them that adults would stand up for what was right, even when it was dangerous. Officer Mendez, Katherine asked, if someone was threatening your family while you were trying to protect them, would you stop being a security officer and call someone else, or would you use your training to neutralize the threat? Mendez was quiet for a long moment. I'd use my training. It's why I have it. That's all I did today. I used my training to protect my school family. The fact that it wasn't the training people expected me to have doesn't change the fundamental nature of what I was doing. Mendez finished his coffee and stood to leave. Maybe you're right, but be careful, Reynolds. Once people know what you're capable of, everything changes. After he left, Katherine sat alone with her thoughts. Mendez was probably right about things changing. For 3 months, she tried to bury her military experience, to be just a principal, as if 2 decades of leadership in the most elite military units was something to hide rather than draw upon. Today had shown her the flaw in that thinking. Lincoln Heights didn't need just another administrator. It needed someone who understood both education and security, someone who could create an environment where learning could flourish precisely because threats were acknowledged and addressed. That night, as she drove home through the neighborhood surrounding her school, Katherine made a decision that would shape everything that followed. She was done pretending to be less than she was. Lincoln Heights deserved her full self, the educator and the warrior, the principal and the commander. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Shadows organization wouldn't simply disappear with his arrest. The community's problems ran deeper than one gang leader. But for the first time since leaving the military, Katherine Reynolds felt fully aligned with her purpose. She wasn't just a principal. She was exactly the leader Lincoln Heights Elementary needed. 3 days after the confrontation with the Shadow, the first media vans appeared outside Lincoln Heights Elementary. Katherine watched from her office window as reporters set up camera equipment and prepared for live broadcasts. The arrest of Marcus Torres, a gang leader who had terrorized multiple neighborhoods, had become headline news, particularly the unusual circumstances of his capture. Principal takes down gang leader read one newspaper headline that a staff member had brought to Katherine's attention. The sensationalism made her uncomfortable, but she understood the public's fascination. It wasn't every day that an elementary school administrator thwarted a gang recruitment operation. Katherine had declined all interview requests, focusing instead on returning the school to normal operations. The students needed stability, not a principal distracted by sudden fame. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Ms. Reynolds, there's someone here to see you, her administrative assistant said, looking slightly flustered. He says it's important, but won't give his name. He's wearing a military uniform. Katherine's curiosity piqued. Send him in, please. The man who entered her office moved with the unmistakable economy of motion that Katherine recognized immediately. A fellow operator. He was in his late 40s. His army dress uniform adorned with the insignia of a full colonel and the distinctive flash of special forces. Ms. Reynolds, he said formally, closing the door behind him. I'm Colonel James Blackwood, 5th Special Forces Group. Katherine rose from her desk, her posture automatically shifting to military bearing. Colonel, what brings you to my school? Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but his eyes carried a hint of amusement. Officially, I'm here as part of a Department of Defense community outreach initiative. Unofficially, I needed to see for myself the former Major Katherine Reynolds, whose takedown of a gang leader made it all the way to Pentagon briefings. Katherine gestured for him to take a seat. I'm surprised the military is paying attention to local law enforcement matters. We weren't until someone ran your name through facial recognition from the news footage. Then things got interesting. Blackwood leaned forward slightly. Your record remains classified, but those with the appropriate clearance know exactly who you are and what you accomplished during your service. Katherine felt a familiar tension building in her shoulders. She had left that life behind for good reasons. Colonel, I appreciate the visit, but I've made my transition to civilian life. I'm just a school principal now. Are you? Blackwood's eyebrow raised slightly. Most principals I know don't orchestrate counterinsurgency operations against gang leaders. It wasn't a counterinsurgency operation. It was protecting my students. By using the same tactical approach you developed for village security operations in Afghanistan. It wasn't a question. Katherine remained silent, neither confirming nor denying his assessment. Blackwood softened his tone. Reynolds, I'm not here to recruit you back or interfere with your new life. Quite the opposite, actually. I'm here because what you did 3 days ago represents exactly the kind of leadership we've been trying to develop through our veteran transition programs. This was unexpected. Katherine had anticipated pushback, perhaps even concerns about exposing military tactics in a civilian context. I'm not sure I understand. The military invests millions in training leaders like you, Blackwood explained. When you leave service, that investment often gets locked away because veterans feel they need to hide their military experience to succeed in civilian sectors. You just demonstrated why that's a mistake. He gestured toward the window, where students could be seen playing safely in the courtyard. You didn't succeed despite your military background. You succeeded because of it. You applied the principles of protective operations to a school environment, and it worked. Katherine considered his words carefully. What exactly are you proposing, Colonel? A pilot program. We want to formally connect transitioning special operations veterans with high-need schools and community organizations. Provide specialized training bridging military leadership with civilian contexts. Create a pathway where veterans can openly use their skills rather than hiding them. He paused. We'd like you to help design it. The proposal resonated with Katherine in unexpected ways. How different would her transition have been if such a program had existed? How many other veterans were hiding their capabilities, trying to fit into predefined civilian roles that utilized only a fraction of their training? I would need to continue my work here, she said finally. Lincoln Heights is my priority. Understood. We're talking about consultation, curriculum development, occasional speaking to transitioning personnel, nothing that would take you away from your school for extended periods. Before Katherine could respond, her phone buzzed with a security alert. She glanced at the screen and frowned. I'm sorry, Colonel, but I need to address this. One of our security measures has been triggered. Blackwood rose immediately. Of course. Duty calls. Katherine moved quickly to the security office, the colonel following at a respectful distance. Officer Mendez was reviewing footage from the school's newly installed cameras. What do we have? Katherine asked. 3 individuals at the north fence line. Mendez reported. They scattered when the proximity alarm sounded, but they were definitely observing the school. The footage showed young men similar to those who had accompanied the shadow during the confrontation. Reconnaissance, Katherine murmured. They're assessing our new security measures. Gang activity doesn't stop with one arrest, Blackwood observed from the doorway. Especially when there's territory involved. Katherine turned to him, suddenly seeing his presence in a new light. Colonel, how long are you in town? I was planning to fly back tomorrow. Why? I'd like to show you something first. After school hours, if you're available. Blackwood nodded. My schedule is flexible. When the final bell rang and the students had been safely dismissed, Katherine led Colonel Blackwood on a tour of the neighborhood surrounding Lincoln Heights Elementary. They walked in civilian clothes, Katherine pointing out key locations. The corner store now reopened under Mr. Diaz's supervision, the community center struggling to maintain programs with limited funding, the areas where gang tags marked territorial claims. This isn't just about the school, she explained as they walked. It's about the entire ecosystem. The gangs target schools because that's where vulnerable children can be found. But their operations extend throughout the community. Blackwood listened attentively. occasionally asking questions that revealed his understanding of insurgency dynamics. As they approached the abandoned recreation center, now cordoned off as a crime scene following the Shadow's arrest, he stopped. "Your approach at the school was tactical," he observed. "But what this community needs is strategic." "Exactly," Katherine agreed. "We prevented a recruitment operation, but we haven't addressed the conditions that make recruitment possible in the first place." They continued walking, passing small businesses with barred windows and homes with security signs. Katherine greeted residents by name, introducing Blackwood simply as a colleague helping with community safety planning. Their final stop was a small cafe owned by a former teacher. Inside, Katherine had arranged for several community leaders to meet them: the president of the neighborhood association, the youth pastor from the local church, the director of the struggling community center, and 2 parents from Lincoln Heights Elementary. "These are the people fighting for this community every day," Katherine explained to Blackwood, before making introductions. For the next hour, the colonel listened as residents described their challenges: limited resources, fragmented security efforts, difficulty coordinating with overworked police, and the constant pressure of gang recruitment targeting their children. "What strikes me," Blackwood said when they'd finished, "is how similar this is to the challenges we faced in stabilizing communities overseas. The same principles apply: building trusted networks, coordinating resources, identifying and addressing vulnerabilities before they can be exploited." The community leaders exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this perspective from a military officer. "That's exactly why I asked Colonel Blackwood to join us," Katherine explained. "The military has developed sophisticated approaches to community protection that can be adapted to civilian contexts. Not to militarize our neighborhood, but to organize our existing resources more effectively." The conversation that followed shifted from complaints about what wasn't working to strategic planning about what could work. Blackwood offered insights from stability operations that translated surprisingly well to urban neighborhood challenges. Katherine facilitated, helping bridge military concepts with community realities. By the time they left the cafe 2 hours later, the beginnings of a comprehensive community protection plan had emerged, one that integrated the school's security measures with broader neighborhood initiatives. "That was impressive," Blackwood said as they walked back toward the school where they'd parked. "You've built real trust with these people." "It's taken time," Katherine acknowledged, "and it's still fragile. One more successful gang recruitment operation could undo months of progress. Which is why you need a strategic approach, not just tactical responses to individual incidents." Katherine nodded. "The challenge is resources. These communities are already stretched thin." "That's where my proposal comes in," Blackwood said thoughtfully. "What if the program included not just placing veterans in schools, but creating support networks for entire communities? Veterans with specialized training working alongside local leaders, bringing both skills and connections to additional resources." The possibility expanded in Katherine's mind, not just a transition program for individual veterans, but a comprehensive approach to community stabilization that leveraged military expertise in civilian contexts. "It would need to be carefully implemented," she cautioned. "Communities like this have reason to be skeptical of outside interventions." "Which is why we need people like you designing it," Blackwood countered. "Veterans who understand both worlds and can build bridges between them." As they reached her car, Katherine made her decision. "I'll help with your program, Colonel, but with conditions. It has to be community-centered, not imposed from above. It has to respect civilian leadership and contexts. And it has to address root causes, not just symptoms." Blackwood extended his hand. "Agreed on all counts, Major. Principal Reynolds." Katherine smiled slightly at the slip. "Just Katherine is fine." "Jim," he replied with a nod. 2 weeks later, Katherine stood at the entrance to Lincoln Heights Elementary, greeting students as they arrived for the day. The morning sun cast long shadows across the freshly painted playground, where new equipment had been installed over the weekend, part of a community revitalization grant that Colonel Blackwood had helped secure through his Pentagon connections. The school had changed visibly since the Shadow's arrest. New security cameras monitored the perimeter. Parent volunteers staffed welcome stations at each entrance, and a refurbished school bus now served as a mobile computer lab for after-school programs. Less visible but equally important were the changes in the surrounding community. The abandoned recreation center was being renovated as a joint-use facility for youth activities and adult education. Local businesses had formed a security cooperative, sharing resources and information. Police had established a regular presence not just for enforcement, but for relationship building. And at the center of it all was Katherine Reynolds, no longer hiding her military background but drawing on it openly to serve her school and community. "Ms. Reynolds," called a familiar voice. Katherine turned to see Mr. Diaz approaching, his corner store now closed on weekday mornings so he could volunteer at the school. "Good morning, Mr. Diaz. How's the new security team working out?" "Like clockwork," he reported proudly. "Former military, just like you said. They understand the neighborhood and know how to talk to the kids." Katherine nodded with satisfaction. The security team, comprised of veterans from the local community, had been one of her first initiatives after agreeing to help with Blackwood's program. Unlike outside security contractors, these veterans lived in the neighborhood and had personal stakes in its success. As the morning bell rang and students filed inside, Katherine's phone buzzed with a message from her administrative assistant. "Visitors in the office. Say they're here for you specifically." Katherine made her way to the main office, curious about the unscheduled visitors. When she opened the door, she froze in surprise. Standing at attention in the small waiting area were 6 men in the distinctive green berets of Army Special Forces. Their service uniforms were immaculate, their posture perfect, their expressions solemn. Katherine recognized them immediately, members of her former command, men she had led through some of the most dangerous operations of the conflict in Afghanistan. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, her former team sergeant, stepped forward. "Permission to address the principal, ma'am?" Katherine felt a surge of emotion, but maintained her composure. "Granted, Master Sergeant." "Major Katherine Reynolds," he began formally, using her military rank. "The men of Operational Detachment Alpha 5326 request permission to pay respects to their former commander." Katherine glanced around, suddenly aware that her administrative staff was watching in stunned silence. This wasn't how she had planned to reveal her military background to the entire school. "Permission granted," she said quietly. As if choreographed, the 6 Green Berets snapped to attention and rendered perfect salutes. "We heard what you did here," Rodriguez continued. "Protecting your people, just like you always taught us. Some leadership principles don't change, no matter the battlefield." Katherine returned their salutes with precision that betrayed years of practice. "At ease, gentlemen. I appreciate the gesture, but this is hardly a military installation." "With respect, ma'am," another operator spoke up, Captain Mitchell, who had been her executive officer. "What you've done here is exactly what Special Forces was designed to do, work with local populations to help them secure their own communities. You're still on mission, just with a different uniform." Katherine couldn't argue with that assessment. She had applied the same principles of community engagement and security planning that had guided their operations overseas, adapted for an urban American context. "We're not just here for a reunion," Rodriguez explained. "Colonel Blackwood briefed us on the program you're developing. We want to help, if you'll have us." Before Katherine could respond, a commotion at the school entrance caught everyone's attention. Officer Mendez appeared at the office door, his expression urgent. "Ms. Reynolds, we have a situation. 3 vehicles just pulled up. Men with gang colors are approaching the building." The Green Berets exchanged glances, their posture shifting subtly from ceremonial to operational. Katherine held up a hand to stop any immediate action. "This is still a school, gentlemen, not a combat zone. Follow my lead." She turned to Mendez. "Lock down the building per protocol. Alert the police." Katherine moved quickly to the entrance, her unexpected military visitors falling in behind her with disciplined precision. Through the glass doors, she could see 5 young men approaching, not the teenagers who typically conducted reconnaissance, but older members with the hard expressions of experienced enforcers. The Shadow's lieutenants, coming to reclaim their territory after his arrest. Katherine pushed through the doors to meet them outside, ensuring any confrontation would occur away from the students. The Green Berets positioned themselves strategically behind her, not threatening but unmistakably present. "This is school property," Katherine called out as the men approached. "You need to leave immediately." The apparent leader, a heavily tattooed man in his 30s, stepped forward. "We got business here." The Shadow sent a message from inside. "This neighborhood belongs to us, and you're interfering." "That's not how this works anymore," Katherine replied calmly. "This school and this community have chosen a different path." The man's eyes narrowed as he took in the uniformed soldiers behind her. "You brought the military? To a school? That's going to play real well on the news." "These are alumni," Katherine improvised smoothly, "visiting their former school. But they're also a reminder that this community has resources you haven't accounted for." The gang members hesitated, clearly unprepared for this development. In the distance, police sirens wailed, growing louder. "This isn't over," the leader said, backing toward their vehicles. "The shadow has people everywhere." "Tell the shadow something for me," Katherine replied, her voice carrying easily across the schoolyard. "Tell him that Lincoln Heights isn't defended by just one principal anymore, it's defended by an entire community." As the Sompledor gang members retreated and police cars appeared at the corner, Katherine turned to her former soldiers. "Well, gentlemen, it seems your timing is impeccable." Rodriguez smiled slightly. "Some things never change, ma'am. You always did have a talent for finding yourself at the decisive point." Katherine surveyed the school grounds, now secure once again, and felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful operation. But this wasn't a temporary victory on a distant battlefield. This was her community, her school, her new mission, and for the first time since leaving the military, she felt fully integrated, the commander and the educator working in harmony toward a common purpose. "Let's take this inside," she said to her unexpected reinforcements. "We have a lot to discuss about the future of this program." As they walked back toward the building, Katherine noticed students watching from classroom windows. Rather than seeing fear in their faces, she saw something far more valuable, the beginning of belief that their school and their community could truly be safe. She wasn't just a principal who had once been a Special Forces commander. She was a leader who had found a way to bring the best of both worlds together in service of those who needed it most. 6 months after the confrontation with the Shadow's lieutenants, Katherine Reynolds stood on the roof of Lincoln Heights Elementary, surveying the transformed landscape below. The morning sun illuminated a neighborhood in Renaissance. Fresh paint on once abandoned buildings, community gardens where vacant lots had festered, and most importantly, children walking to school without fear. The pilot program that Colonel Blackwood had proposed had evolved beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a placement initiative for transitioning Special Forces veterans had blossomed into a comprehensive community revitalization model being implemented in 12 high-need school districts across the country. Katherine's phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. "They're ready for you in the library." Today marked a milestone, the first national conference on the Veterans in Education and Community Transformation Initiative hosted at Lincoln Heights. Educators, military personnel, community leaders, and government officials had gathered to learn about what the media had dubbed the Reynolds model. Katherine took one final moment of solitude before descending to face the crowd. The journey from hiding her military background to openly integrating it into her educational leadership had been challenging but transformative. She was no longer trying to be just a principal. She had become something new, something that hadn't existed before. The library had been transformed into a conference space, with rows of chairs facing a small stage. As Katherine entered, conversations hushed. She recognized faces from across the country. Principals from Chicago and Baltimore who had implemented her security protocols, veterans who had found new purpose in troubled schools, community organizers who had adapted military planning processes for neighborhood revitalization. Superintendent Johnson stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce the architect of what may be the most innovative approach to school and community safety we've seen in a generation." 3 years ago, Katherine Reynolds arrived at Lincoln Heights Elementary with a resume that mentioned nothing about her military service. Today, she's showing us all how the principles of elite military leadership can transform our most vulnerable schools. As applause filled the room, Katherine moved to the podium, her posture reflecting both her military bearing and her educator's warmth. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "What we're discussing today isn't about militarizing our schools. It's about recognizing that the principles of effective leadership transcend contexts, whether it's a Special Forces team operating in hostile territory or an elementary school serving a challenged community." She gestured to charts, showing the dramatic improvements in attendance, academic performance, and neighborhood safety statistics around Lincoln Heights. These numbers tell part of the story, but they don't capture the human transformation. 6 months ago, our students walked to school with their eyes down, trying to avoid notice. Today, they walk with their heads up, confident in their safety and their future. Katherine moved from behind the podium, preferring to engage directly with her audience. The Veterans in Education initiative works because it addresses 3 critical gaps in our approach to struggling schools. She held up one finger. First, security. Not just cameras and locks, but comprehensive environmental design that creates zones of safety extending beyond school boundaries. A second finger, community integration. Schools cannot succeed as islands. They must be connected to the resources and strengths already present in the community. A third finger, leadership development. Not just for administrators, but for teachers, parents, and most importantly, students themselves. As Katherine outlined the practical applications of these principles, she noticed a group of men standing quietly at the back of the room. Their posture and attentive stillness marked them as military, even in civilian clothes. At their center stood a distinguished man in his 60s, whose face Katherine had seen in news reports, but never expected to meet in person, General David Harris, commander of U.S. Special Operations Command. Katherine continued her presentation without pausing, but her mind raced with questions. Why would such a high-ranking officer attend a conference about educational transformation? After concluding her formal remarks and answering questions from attendees, Katherine found herself surrounded by educators eager to discuss specific aspects of the program. It was nearly an hour before she could break away to approach the military contingent, but they had waited patiently. "General Harris," she said, extending her hand. "This is an unexpected honor." The general's handshake was firm, his assessment direct. "Major Reynolds. Or do you prefer Principal Reynolds now?" "Katherine is fine, sir." Harris nodded. "Katherine, then. What you've built here has attracted significant attention, and not just in educational circles." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure I understand." "Walk with me," he suggested. "Some conversations are better had in motion." They moved outside to the school grounds, security personnel maintaining a respectful distance. The general observed the campus with the practiced eye of someone who assessed environments professionally. "The National Security Council received a briefing last month," he began, "about innovative approaches to countering domestic radicalization and gang recruitment. Your program was highlighted as a case study in community resilience." Katherine processed this information carefully. "I'm honored, but this isn't a counterterrorism initiative. It's an educational model." "That's precisely why it's effective," Harris replied. "The best security solutions don't look like security solutions. They look like community improvement, educational opportunity, economic development." He stopped at the edge of the playground, where children were visible through classroom windows, engaged in their studies. "We've spent 20 years fighting extremism abroad," he continued, "often with mixed results. Meanwhile, we've largely ignored the conditions that breed extremism at home. Alienation, lack of opportunity, absence of positive role models, vulnerable communities." Katherine began to understand the direction of his interest. "You're seeing this as a preventative approach rather than a reactive one." "Exactly. The military excels at responding to threats once they've emerged. We're less adept at preventing their emergence in the first place." He turned to face her directly. "The President has established a task force on community resilience and threat prevention. I've been asked to recommend personnel with relevant expertise." The implication was clear. "General, I appreciate the consideration, but my place is here. This school, this community, they're not just a project to me." Harris smiled slightly. "I said the same thing when I was pulled from Field Command to take a Pentagon assignment. Sometimes our experience becomes more valuable when it can be applied more broadly." He handed her a sealed envelope. "This contains a formal invitation to serve as a special advisor to the task force. Part-time, allowing you to maintain your position here. Consider it carefully before deciding." Katherine accepted the envelope, her mind already calculating the potential impact of such a role. Could the lessons from Lincoln Heights influence national policy? Could the integration of military expertise with community development become a model for addressing root causes of violence and extremism? Before she could respond, a commotion at the school entrance caught their attention. A black SUV had pulled up, and security personnel were directing someone inside with unusual urgency. "Ms. Reynolds!" Officer Mendez called out, hurrying toward them. "You need to come quickly. There's been a development with the Shadow case." Katherine excused herself and followed Mendez to her office, where two FBI agents waited. Their expressions conveyed the seriousness of the situation. Principal Reynolds, the senior agent, began, "Marcus Torres escaped during a prisoner transfer this morning. We have credible intelligence that he's made threats specifically against you and this school." The news landed with the impact of a physical blow, but Katherine's mind immediately shifted to operational planning. Where was he last seen? About 30 miles from here, but he has associates in this neighborhood. We're implementing protection protocols for you and increased security for the school. Katherine processed this information with practiced calm. We have a conference with over 100 attendees today, including high-profile visitors. We need to maintain normal operations while enhancing security discreetly. The agent looked surprised at her response. "Ms. Reynolds, you should consider relocation until Torres is recaptured." "That's not an option," Katherine replied firmly. "This school faces threats regularly. We don't abandon our posts because the threat level increases." As if to underscore her point, General Harris appeared in the doorway. "Is there a situation requiring assistance, Principal Reynolds?" The FBI agents recognized him immediately, their postures straightening reflexively. Katherine made quick introductions and summarized the situation. Harris assessed the circumstances with military precision. "You have multiple Special Forces veterans on site for the conference, plus local law enforcement and federal agents. This facility can be secured effectively while maintaining operational continuity." The senior FBI agent nodded reluctantly. "We'll coordinate with local police and your security team." As they departed to implement security measures, Harris turned to Katherine. "You were right to stay. Leaving would send exactly the wrong message to this community and to Torres himself." Katherine moved to the window, looking out at the neighborhood she had helped transform. "The Shadow believes he can reclaim this territory through fear. He fundamentally misunderstands what's changed here. Which is, this isn't just a school with improved security anymore. It's a community that has learned to defend itself." She turned back to the general. "When I first arrived, everyone here was isolated. Teachers from parents, the school from the neighborhood, residents from each other. The Shadow exploited those divisions." Harris nodded his understanding. "And now we've built what my former team sergeant would call operational cohesion. Everyone knows their role in maintaining community safety, and they trust each other to perform those roles." Katherine's phone buzzed with updates from her security team. Conference attendees were being briefed on enhanced security protocols, local police had established perimeter surveillance, and community alert networks had been activated. "I should address the conference participants," she said. "They deserve to know what's happening." "How will you frame it?" Harris asked. Katherine considered the question carefully. "As a real-time demonstration of the principles we've been discussing. Community resilience in the face of specific threats." When Katherine returned to the library, the atmosphere had shifted. Security personnel were more visible, and conversations had taken on a tense quality as news of the Shadow's escape spread. She took the podium with calm authority. "I want to address the situation directly. Marcus Torres, known as the Shadow, has escaped custody and may target this area. All appropriate security measures have been implemented." She paused, gauging the room. Some faces showed concern, others resolve. This conference is about transforming how we approach community safety and educational resilience. Today, we have an opportunity to demonstrate these principles in action rather than just discussing them theoretically. Katherine gestured to the veterans scattered throughout the audience. "Many of you have operated in far more dangerous environments than this. Others have led schools through daily challenges that would overwhelm most administrators. Together, we represent exactly the combination of skills and experience needed to handle this situation." The tension in the room began to shift toward purposeful energy. "We will continue our program with enhanced security protocols in place. Local law enforcement has established a protective perimeter, And our community alert network has been activated. This is precisely the integrated response model we've been developing. By reframing the threat as an opportunity to demonstrate the program's effectiveness, Katherine transformed what could have been a crisis into a powerful teaching moment. The conference resumed with increased focus and engagement. Throughout the afternoon, Katherine maintained her schedule while receiving regular security updates. The shadow had not been located, but surveillance had identified several of his associates attempting to observe the school, all of whom had been quietly detained by police. As the conference concluded for the day, Katherine met with her security team, now augmented by FBI agents and several Special Forces veterans who had volunteered to assist. The assembled group represented an extraordinary concentration of tactical expertise. "Torres will make his move after dark," predicted Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had remained in close contact since his initial visit 6 months earlier. "His pattern has always been to create fear through night operations, then exploit that fear during daylight. He'll target symbols rather than individuals," added another veteran who had specialized in psychological operations. "His power relies on perception. He needs a visible victory to re-establish his authority." Katherine considered these assessments. "Then we need to control the narrative. If he's coming, let's determine where and when he arrives." The plan that emerged combined military precision with Katherine's deep knowledge of the community. Rather than fortifying the school itself, turning it into an obvious target, they would extend security throughout the neighborhood, creating a web of surveillance and response capabilities that would identify threats before they materialized. Community volunteers, coordinated through the network Katherine had helped establish, would serve as additional eyes and ears. Veterans from the conference would provide expertise and support to local police. And at the center of it all, Lincoln Heights Elementary would continue operating normally, refusing to show fear. As darkness fell, Katherine remained at the school, coordinating operations from her office. The building had been swept and secured, with only essential personnel remaining inside. Conference attendees had been safely escorted to their hotels, though many of the veterans had chosen to stay and assist with neighborhood security. General Harris had also remained, observing the operation with professional interest. "This is impressive coordination between civilian and military-trained personnel," he noted. "Exactly the kind of integration we've been trying to achieve in overseas stability operations." "The difference is trust," Katherine replied. "These community members and veterans have been working together for months. They've built relationships that transcend their different backgrounds." A security alert interrupted their conversation. Movement detected at the abandoned warehouse 3 blocks from the school, a location that had been identified as a potential staging area for gang operations. Multiple subjects observed entering the east side of the building, reported Officer Mendez through the secure communication system. One matches Torres's description. Katherine activated the response protocol they had established. Police units would maintain perimeter containment while FBI tactical teams prepared for potential intervention. Community alert networks would ensure residents stayed clear of the area. "He's gathering his forces," observed General Harris. "Preparing for something significant." Katherine nodded. "This isn't just about me or the school anymore. It's about reclaiming territory and re-establishing fear. He needs a public demonstration of power." "What's your assessment of his likely target?" Katherine considered the question from the Shadow's perspective, not the school. Too well protected now. He needs something visible, something that would symbolize the community's transformation. Realization struck her. The community-centered dedication tomorrow. It's the perfect target. Public, symbolic, and scheduled to include city officials and media. The renovated recreation center, once abandoned and used by gangs for recruitment, had been transformed into a state-of-the-art community facility. Its official opening represented everything the Shadow opposed: community empowerment, safe spaces for youth, and the reclamation of territory from gang influence. Katherine immediately adjusted the Bleda security plan, reinforcing surveillance around the community center while maintaining protection for the school. As reports continued flowing in, it became clear that the Shadow was indeed planning a significant operation, perhaps his most ambitious attempt yet to reassert control over the neighborhood. Near midnight, Katherine stepped outside for a moment of fresh air, processing the developments and refining strategy. The night was quiet, The school grounds peaceful under security lighting. In the distance, she could see the illuminated community center, its new sign, a beacon of neighborhood transformation. A voice spoke from the shadows near the building's edge. "You should have left when you had the chance." Katherine turned slowly, maintaining her composure as the shadow emerged into the light. He had changed during his months in prison. Thinner, harder, his eyes carrying a dangerous intensity. "Marcus," she said calmly, using his real name rather than his street moniker. "I wondered if you'd come yourself or send your people. Some messages need to be delivered personally." He moved closer, his hands visible but his posture threatening. "You took everything from me. My organization, my territory, my reputation." Katherine noticed the security cameras tracking the encounter, knew that response teams were already mobilizing based on established protocols. She just needed to keep him talking. "You lost those things because you preyed on children in terrorized communities," she replied. "This neighborhood chose a different path." "They chose what you told them to choose," he snarled. "Playing soldier in a school principal's outfit. You think your military games can change what this place really is?" Katherine recognized the tactical situation. The shadow had separated from his group, approaching her directly rather than executing the larger operation they had anticipated. His ego had overridden his strategy, creating an opportunity. "This place is whatever its people decide it will be," she said. "That's something I learned both in the military and in education. Lasting change only happens when communities choose it for themselves." His expression twisted with contempt. Pretty words from someone who won't live to see tomorrow. Katherine maintained eye contact, her voice steady. "Look around you, Marcus. Really look. Do you think you're having this conversation by accident? Do you think you approached this building without being observed? That you're standing here now without being targeted?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face as he scanned the surroundings. Security lights illuminated the area, but the shadows beyond concealed multiple positions where response teams had quietly moved into place. "You're surrounded," Katherine continued, "not just by police or federal agents, but by an entire community that has learned to work together. The neighborhood you tried to control through fear has found something stronger. Common purpose." The shadow's hand moved toward his waistband, but Katherine's voice stopped him. "Before you make that choice, understand what happens next. You'll be detained or killed, your remaining organization will be dismantled, and tomorrow morning, children will still walk into this school without fear. The community center will still open. Life here will continue improving." She took a step closer, her military bearing fully evident. "Or you can choose differently. Surrender now, cooperate with authorities about your remaining network, and be part of building something rather than destroying it." For a tense moment, the shadows seemed to waver, conflicting impulses battling across his features. Then, with deliberate slowness, his hand moved away from his waistband. "You think giving up changes anything for me? I'm looking at life either way." "It changes what you stand for," Katherine replied. "Right now, you're just another gang leader who terrorized children. You could be something more." Before he could respond, the area flooded with light as tactical teams emerged from concealed positions. The shadow raised his hands slowly, his expression unreadable as agents moved in to take him into custody. General Harris approached as Torres was being secured. "You took a significant risk engaging him directly." Katherine watched as the shadow was led to a waiting vehicle. Sometimes leadership requires personal engagement with the most difficult challenges. That's true in combat, in schools, and in communities. The next morning, as dawn broke over Lincoln Heights Elementary, Katherine stood at the entrance greeting students as they arrived. News of the shadow's recapture had spread throughout the neighborhood, but the children seemed more excited about the community center opening scheduled for that afternoon. "Ms. Reynolds," called a fifth grader named Miguel, "is it true that Bad Man tried to come back and you stopped him?" Katherine smiled. "It wasn't just me, Miguel. It was our whole community working together. The police, the neighborhood watch, the veterans who help with our programs, and families like yours who report suspicious activity." The boy considered this seriously. "Like a team? exactly like a team. Everyone doing their part to keep our school and neighborhood safe. As the day progressed, the conference resumed with renewed energy. Participants having witnessed firsthand the effectiveness of the integrated approach Katherine had developed. The community center dedication proceeded as scheduled, with enhanced but unobtrusive security measures in place. Standing on the stage beside community leaders, educators, and military personnel, Katherine surveyed the crowd gathered for the ceremony. Children played on new equipment while parents chatted confidently in open spaces that had once been dangerous. Elderly residents sat in shaded areas, no longer afraid to leave their homes. When it came her turn to speak, Katherine stepped to the microphone with the quiet authority that had become her hallmark. What you see around you today isn't just a renovated building or new playground equipment. It's the physical manifestation of a community that refused to surrender to fear. Every painted wall, every safe pathway, every program offered in this center represents a choice. The choice to build rather than destroy, to unite rather than divide, to protect rather than exploit. She gestured to the veterans standing among the crowd, many of whom now served as mentors, coaches, and security advisors throughout the neighborhood. These men and women brought skills from one battlefield to another. They understood that the principles that protect our nation abroad can also strengthen our communities at home when adapted with respect and humility. Katherine looked toward Lincoln Heights Elementary, visible on the hill above the community center. A school cannot thrive as an island of safety in a sea of danger. A community cannot prosper when its children live in fear, and veterans cannot fully transition to civilian life if their most valuable skills remain untapped. She turned back to the audience. The program we've built bridges these gaps. It honors the service of our veterans by creating new pathways for their leadership. It strengthens our schools by extending safety beyond their walls, and it empowers communities by connecting resources that were previously isolated. As applause filled the air, Katherine noticed a group of uniformed figures at the back of the crowd, her former Green Beret team standing alongside new veterans who had joined the program. They weren't saluting this time, but their presence carried the same message of respect and solidarity. Katherine completed her remarks and stepped back as the ceremony continued. General Harris approached, envelope in hand. "Have you considered our offer?" he asked quietly. Katherine looked around at what they had built. Not just a safe school or a renovated community center, but a model that could transform similar communities across the country. "I have," she replied. "I'll serve as an advisor on one condition. The program remains centered on educational excellence and community development, not security alone. The military principles we apply must serve human flourishing, not just threat prevention." Harris extended his hand. "Agreed. Your perspective is precisely why we need you involved." As the ceremony concluded and community members gathered for celebration, Katherine found herself surrounded by the multiple worlds she now bridged. Educators discussing curriculum with veterans, community organizers planning with security specialists, parents laughing with city officials. She was no longer just a principal who had once been a military commander, nor a former Special Forces officer trying to adapt to civilian leadership. She had become something new, a translator between worlds that desperately needed to understand each other, a builder of bridges that connected isolated islands of expertise into networks of community resilience. The transformation of Lincoln Heights had begun with one woman refusing to be just a principal when her students needed more. It had grown into a movement that recognized the untapped potential of veterans returning to civilian life. And it had blossomed into a model for community empowerment that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. As Katherine watched children playing safely in spaces that had once been dangerous, she recognized that her greatest mission had never been overseas in combat zones, but here, creating environments where young lives could flourish without fear. She wasn't just a principal. She wasn't just a former commander. She was a leader who had found her true calling in the space between worlds, building pathways that others could follow. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.